The conference room is cold the way expensive rooms are always cold. Marble, glass, silence that costs something. She sits alone on one side of a long mahogany table in a suit she ironed 3 times this morning. Across from her, lawyers, pearls, a woman in Chanel who has never lost anything in her life. The attorney opens a folder. He reads. The number he says is $1. The room laughs. She doesn't. Because what no one in that room knows, what the woman in Chanel cannot possibly know, what even she herself does not yet know, is that somewhere 2 hours north, on a hill above a frozen lake, inside a house that has been locked and waiting, a dead woman left something behind. Not money, not property, something harder to contest than either. The attorney slides a card across the table. His eyes find hers. Hold. 9 o'clock, he says. Don't be late. She picks up the card, and the room is still laughing. Have you ever been handed something so small, so deliberately humiliating, that the entire room laughed? Not with you. At you. Olivia Mercer had been standing in front of that mahogany table for exactly 4 minutes, when she understood that today was not going to be the day her luck turned. The conference room smelled like lemonwood polish and very expensive coffee and Donna Hargrove's perfume, something heavy and floral that cost more per bottle than Olivia's monthly grocery budget. She knew this because she had once made the mistake of asking what it was, back when she still thought she was part of this family. That was a different life. She sat alone on her side of the table in the black slacks she had ironed 3 times that morning. The fabric at the left cuff was starting to thin. She had noticed it under the bathroom light at 6 a.m. and stood there for a moment just staring at it, this small, irreversible evidence that things wore out. That even careful things wore out. Then she ironed the cuff anyway, and told herself it wasn't noticeable from a distance. Everything was fine from a distance. Donna Hargrove sat directly across from her, draped in a black Chanel suit, with pearl buttons that Olivia suspected cost more than her Honda Accord. 64 years old. Talk Bok Kim, platinum, not silver. There was a difference, and Donna made sure everyone understood it, swept back and set in a style so rigid it looked like it had been lacquered in place. Pearls at her throat, rings on 2 fingers, the particular kind of stillness that came not from peace but from decades of practice performing it. Beside her, Stephen, Olivia's ex-husband, 38 years old, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, eyes the color of shallow lake water, blue with nothing underneath. He was wearing the gray suit he used for client presentations. He had his arms crossed, and his gaze fixed somewhere slightly above Olivia's head, as if looking at her directly required more effort than he was willing to put in today. She hadn't seen him in 4 months. He looked exactly the same. That shouldn't have surprised her. And yet, Raymond Whitlock sat at the head of the table. 66 years old. Salt and pepper hair cut short and neat. Eyes that were green in certain light, and something closer to hazel in others. Warm eyes, she had thought, when she first met him, the kind that belonged to a man who had been doing something difficult for a long time and had made peace with it. He wore a charcoal jacket over a white shirt, no tie, a gold watch that looked like it had been his father's. He held a thick leather folder on the table in front of him and said nothing while the room settled. Olivia clasped her hands in her lap and waited. She had driven 2 hours to get here. She had paid for parking with a crumpled $5 bill and 4 quarters she found in the cup holder. She had eaten half a granola bar in the car because she hadn't wanted to spend money on breakfast before she knew what today was going to be. She had told herself, maybe something small, maybe a piece of jewelry or money for Nora's next round of medical tests. Or she had let herself think this once, quietly, in the car, maybe something that would let her breathe for 3 months instead of 2. Maybe. Whitlock opened the folder. To Donna Hargrove, he began, his voice measured, carrying just far enough. I leave my collection of Wedgwood china and the bound correspondence from the Ashworth family archive. Donna's expression didn't change, but something shifted around her eyes. Something micro and controlled that meant she had expected more. To Stephen Hargrove, I leave the 1985 Jeep Wagoneer currently held in storage at the Greystone Falls property. Stephen's mouth curved. Not quite a smile. More the expression of a man who has just been offered something he considers beneath the occasion. And to Olivia Mercer, she straightened. She was not aware she had done it until she noticed her shoulders up near her ears. I leave the sum of $1, United States currency, to be paid in cash at the conclusion of this reading. The room went silent. Not the polite silence of people waiting. The sharp, pressurized silence of people trying very hard not to react, while they reacted. For seconds. Then Donna Hargrove laughed. It wasn't a polite laugh. It wasn't the kind of sound a person made when something was mildly amusing. It was a real laugh, genuine, bright, a little ugly, the kind that comes from a place of deep satisfaction, and it rang off the glass walls of the conference room like a small bell made of cruelty. $1. Donna turned and looked directly at Olivia. Her eyes were light brown and very clear. A woman who had never even met you could see exactly what you were worth. Stephen didn't laugh. He looked at the window. Olivia's face went hot. She felt it in her jaw first, then her cheekbones, then the space behind her eyes, where the tears lived, when she was refusing to cry. She pressed her fingernails into her palm, hard enough to feel. Not here. Not in front of them. Not one single tear in front of these people. Whitlock did not laugh. He reached into his briefcase and produced a single dollar bill, new, crisp, the kind that made a soft sound when it moved, and slid it across the polished table toward Olivia. Then he placed, directly on top of it, a card. Heavy stock, cream-colored, text embossed in copper ink. Miss Mercer. His voice was quiet. It was not meant for the room. It was meant for her. I will need to speak with you privately tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. The address on that card. Donna stopped laughing. Her eyes narrowed. She's already received her inheritance. What exactly is left to discuss? Whitlock didn't look at Donna. He looked at Olivia. Just Olivia. With the steady, deliberate patience of a man who had decided something long before he walked into this room. 9 o'clock, Miss Mercer. Don't be late. Olivia picked up the dollar bill. She picked up the card. Her hands were not entirely steady, but she made them move. She made herself stand. She put the card in her coat pocket and the dollar bill in her wallet next to the 6 other dollars she had, and she walked out of the conference room without looking at either of them. She made it all the way to the elevator before she let herself lean against the wall. She stood there, with her eyes closed for a long moment, listening to the distant sound of the building. HVAC. Someone's heels on tile. Donna's voice, probably still going, though Olivia could no longer make out the words. $1. Even the dead thought she was worth $1. She opened her eyes, looked at the elevator doors, looked at her own reflection in the steel, distorted, shorter than she actually was, the cuff of her black pants visible at the edge of the frame. She took the card out of her pocket. Heavy cream stock. Copper letters. Whitlock and Associates. 12 Ashworth Lane, Greystone Falls, NH. Greystone Falls. She had never heard of it. She had typed it into her phone maps in the car afterward and gotten a loading circle that just kept spinning. Not a result. Not even a suggestion. No GPS signal for a place that was apparently 2 hours northwest. That should have felt like a bad sign. It felt like something else. She put the card back in her pocket. She pressed the elevator button. She stood very straight and kept her face entirely still and rode down to the lobby alone. What the room in that conference suite did not know, what Donna Hargrove, who was probably still laughing, had no idea about, was that the card Raymond Whitlock had placed on top of that $1 bill was not a formality. It was not legal protocol. It was not the polite professional courtesy of a man wrapping up a reading and offering to answer follow-up questions. It was the beginning of something that had been set in motion 3 years before Olivia walked into that room. She just didn't know it yet. 3 years earlier, Olivia Mercer's life had been, by the standards of someone paying attention, entirely reasonable. Not spectacular. Not the life she might have sketched at 22 in the margins of a nursing school notebook. But reasonable. Solid. The kind of life that made sense. She had been a nurse at Concord Regional Medical Center for 6 years. Overnight shifts when she could get them, 15% differential, which mattered, and days when she couldn't. She came home at 7 in the morning and slept until noon and picked Nora up from preschool at 3. She made dinner. She read to Nora at bedtime. She paid the bills on time, usually, or close enough. Her husband Stephen had a job that required him to be somewhere else most of the time. Conferences, client dinners, trips to cities, with good hotel bars, and she had arranged her life around that absence so completely that she had stopped noticing it was an absence. She told herself this was modern, efficient, two people with separate professional lives sharing a home and a daughter and a mortgage and calling that a marriage. She had believed it. Mostly. Their house was a gray colonial in the part of Concord, where the lots were slightly bigger than average, and the trees were tall enough to have been there before any of the houses. There was a backyard with an apple tree that had been there since before either of them, thick-trunked and crooked, and Nora loved it the way children love things that are too large and too old to be explained, just ran around it in circles when the mood struck her, laughing at something only she could hear. Then April came. Nora was 4. It started with bruising, small marks on her shins that Olivia noticed while bathing her one evening, 2, then 3, then several across her upper arm that had no explanation Olivia could find. Nora didn't fall that much. Nora was not the falling type. She was precise and careful and very interested in her own physical safety, which she had apparently decided was entirely her own responsibility at age 3. The bruises were followed by fatigue. Then fever, low grade at first, then not. The hematologist at the hospital where Olivia worked was named Dr. Benson, and he had kind eyes and a habit of pausing before he spoke that Olivia had always found comforting when she watched him talk to other families. She did not find it comforting when he used it on her. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, highly treatable, excellent long-term prognosis with aggressive intervention. These were the phrases he used. Olivia wrote them down on the notepad she had brought. She was still in nurse mode, still functioning, still taking notes, and her handwriting looked entirely normal, which seemed wrong. She requested immediate leave from the hospital. The charge nurse on her floor, a woman named Alice, who had worked nights there for 19 years, had hugged her in the break room, without asking, and told her the schedule would be fine. Olivia had stood there, with her arms at her sides for a moment, not knowing how to receive something offered that cleanly, and then she had hugged Alice back and left. Stephen was at a conference in Atlanta. He came home that evening. He sat at the kitchen table with her, and she told him everything she knew, which was not yet very much. He was quiet throughout. He asked 2 questions, practical questions about the treatment timeline and the insurance coverage, and then he said he thought this called for a glass of wine, and she had said yes, and they had sat there together until 10 o'clock, not saying very much, just present with it. She had thought, that night, we can do this. People do harder things. Couples do harder things. This is what marriage is for. The thing you cannot hold alone, you hold together. She had thought that. She had believed it. She had been wrong. 6 months into Nora's treatment, on a Tuesday evening, when Nora was asleep and the apartment, they had rented an apartment near the hospital to be closer to the oncology ward, a detail that felt temporary at the time, and then didn't, was quiet. Stephen sat down across from her at the kitchen table. He had papers, not the kind of papers she had been accumulating, insurance claims, treatment schedules, the medical billing statements that arrived weekly in manila envelopes she had started filing by date, because she couldn't make herself read them as they came. Different papers. He slid them across the table with the practiced ease of a man who had been thinking about this for a while. I can't do this anymore. His voice was level, moderate, the way he sounded in a business meeting when he was declining something without wanting to seem emotional about it. This isn't the life I want. Olivia looked at him across the kitchen table of the apartment they had rented to be close to their daughter's chemotherapy infusions. She looked at him for a long time. She said, Nora is asleep in the next room. I know. She has treatment Thursday. I know. She picked up the papers. She read them. She set them back down. She looked at this man she had known for 11 years, had met in a coffee shop near the nursing school when she was 24 and he was 25, and he had asked to sit at her table because all the other tables were taken, which she later learned was not entirely true, and she felt something go very quiet inside her. Not rage, not grief, something colder, understanding. She had been wrong about what they were doing together. She had made an error in assessment. She had mistaken the performance of steadiness for steadiness itself. Those were different things, and she had not distinguished between them until just now, sitting at this table, looking at the papers he had placed in front of her. The Hargrove family attorney, a firm in Manchester that Donna kept on permanent retainer the way some people kept a car service, handled the divorce in 9 weeks. Olivia could not afford her own representation. She had no income. She had taken extended leave, and the short-term disability payments had ended. The judge noted that she was temporarily unemployed by choice and awarded Stephen the house and set child support at a level that assumed she would return to full-time nursing work within 3 months. She did not return to full-time nursing work within 3 months. Nora's treatment required someone present 3 days a week at minimum, and the nursing license required continuing education credits. That required money she didn't have, and the credits required time that she was spending in a hospital waiting room holding a paper cup of bad coffee and watching the oncology ward hallway. What she walked away from the marriage with: debt. The specific, itemized debt of keeping a child alive with excellent medical care and inadequate insurance coverage. $131,000 of it, spread across 7 different providers, arriving in statements she kept in the blue filing box under her bed. She moved into the 1-bedroom apartment in Concord. Nora took the bedroom. Olivia slept on the pull-out sofa in the living room and told Nora it was like camping, and Nora, who was 6 by then and no longer had hair, but had developed the observational capabilities of a small, very alert detective, had looked at her and said, "Camping is outside, Mama." And Olivia had said yes, this is the inside kind, and Nora had decided to accept this on a provisional basis. Food stamps. Shifts at the diner on Loudon Road. They were always short-staffed overnight, and the tips were reliable, from the truckers and the nurses getting off shift at the hospital down the street, and the occasional insomniac who ate scrambled eggs at 3 a.m. and needed someone to talk to. And Brenda Calloway, from apartment 4C across the hall, who had knocked on her door 2 weeks after Olivia moved in, with a container of soup and the specific efficiency of someone who had been through something difficult herself and understood the logistics. Brenda Calloway was 42 years old. Auburn hair cut short, brown eyes with amber in them, the kind of laugh that you could hear through walls. She was a payroll manager at a logistics company and had a cat named Biscuit who was missing 1 ear and had strong opinions about strangers. She had lived in 4C for 6 years and knew everyone in the building and had apparently decided, without consulting Olivia, that Olivia was now under her personal supervision. She texted every Thursday, "How's Nora this week?" Not a question, a check-in. There was a difference. Nora was 7 now. She had been in remission for 8 months, the kind of remission that the doctors called excellent, and Olivia called fragile in her own mind, privately, because she had been a nurse long enough to know what excellent meant and what it didn't mean. There were still monthly blood draws, still quarterly scans, still the particular quality of dread that sat quietly in the back of Olivia's chest every time she drove Nora to the hospital for a routine appointment. The dread of knowing she should be grateful it was only routine. She was grateful. She was terrified. She had learned to be both at the same time. The certified letter from Whitlock and Associates had arrived 4 weeks ago. It had informed her, in the careful, neutral language of legal correspondence, that her great-aunt by extended family connection, Dorothy Eleanor Ashworth, had passed away at the age of 83 in Greystone Falls, New Hampshire, and had named Olivia Mercer in her will. Dorothy Ashworth. Olivia had stood in the hallway of her apartment building holding that letter and tried to place the name. She had a memory, vague and childhood-sized, of a woman who sent birthday cards. A card with a $5 bill when she turned 8, maybe 9. A woman her mother had referred to in passing as your great-aunt Dorothy, the one who lived up north, said in the way that implied a degree of geographical and familial distance that made regular contact unlikely. She had not seen Dorothy Ashworth since she was a child, if she had seen her at all. She was not certain she had. The letter said there was a reading of the will. It gave a date, a time, an address in Concord. It said her presence was required. Olivia had stood in that hallway and allowed herself, just briefly, just for a moment, to hope. The particular hope of someone who is almost out of options and has been almost out of options for long enough that hope feels less like optimism and more like a reflex. Not expectation, just the body's insistence on not giving up before it has to. Maybe something small, maybe enough, maybe just barely enough. Then the reading had happened, and $1. And now she was sitting on her pull-out sofa at 9:30 at night, with the cream-colored card propped against the lamp, Nora asleep through the thin wall, with her nightlight on, the yellow one shaped like a moon, the one that had moved with them from the house to the apartment, without discussion, because some things were non-negotiable even in the process of everything falling apart. And Olivia was looking at the address and trying to decide what it meant. Whitlock and Associates, 12 Ashworth Lane, Greystone Falls, NH. She had looked up Greystone Falls again, this time on her laptop instead of her phone, in case the connection made a difference. It did not. There was a town. There was evidence of a town, a brief local government page that hadn't been updated since 2019, a reference in a hiking forum to a trail near Greystone Lake. But no street-level maps. No driving directions from Concord. 2 hours northwest, roughly, if she was reading the general area correctly. That would put her close to the Vermont border. Mountain roads, probably some of them unpaved this time of year. She had $17 in her wallet, 6 of which were left from the day's earnings. She had a tank of gas that was slightly less than half full. She had a card embossed in copper ink and a dead woman's lawyer asking her not to be late. She thought about the way Whitlock had looked at her when he slid the card across. Not with pity, not with the professionally neutral expression she associated with lawyers managing difficult conversations. He had looked at her the way a person looked at someone they had been thinking about before they walked into the room. The way you looked at someone you already knew something about. She didn't understand what was happening, but she had survived 2 years of not understanding what was happening, and she was still here. So, she set the card down, went to the kitchen, found a gas station map, the paper kind, folded badly and refolded worse, that she had gotten from the Sunoco on South Main 2 months ago for a different trip that had never happened. She spread it on the kitchen table under the overhead light and found the stretch of road she needed. She would need to leave by 6:45 to make it by 9. She would need to stop for gas in the morning, which would take another $12, leaving her 5. She would need to park somewhere, and she would need to hope she didn't get lost on whatever back roads led to an address that did not appear on any digital map. She folded the paper map along new lines, put the card in her coat pocket. Nora would go to Brenda's in the morning. Brenda would take her to school. Brenda would ask no questions until Olivia came back. This was the agreement they had reached across the hallway, over soup and through the thin walls of a Concord apartment building, without ever actually stating it aloud. I will be here. I will hold what needs to be held. I will not ask you to explain yourself until you're ready. Olivia turned off the kitchen light and went to lie down on the pull-out sofa. She did not sleep for a long time. She lay there in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about $1. She thought about Donna Hargrove's laugh. She thought about the specific copper color of the lettering on the card and the weight of it in her hand, heavier than a business card ought to be, made of something that was not going to wilt in a coat pocket. She thought about the way Raymond Whitlock had said 9 o'clock. Don't be late. Not, let me know if you have questions. Not, please bring identification. Don't be late. Like being on time was the only thing required of her. Like everything else was already arranged. She closed her eyes. Outside, a car passed on the street below. Nora made a small sound. Through the wall, the brief, undirected sound of a child deeply asleep and dreaming something uncomplicated. Olivia let out a breath she had probably been holding since that conference room. Then she let herself sleep. She left at 6:42. She drove through the dark of a November morning on I-93 North, with the heat on low and the radio off, and the folded map on the passenger seat next to her travel mug. At the Sunoco in Concord, she put $12 of regular into the tank and bought nothing else, and stood in the cold parking lot for a moment watching the numbers tick up on the pump and telling herself, you are doing the right thing. Whatever this is, going is right. Staying home and wondering would be its own kind of loss. She got back in the car. She took Route 93 to Route 302, then west on the 2-lane road that the map called State Route 116, but that lost its markings somewhere past the town of Bath. The forest thickened. The sky was the particular gray of New Hampshire in November, Not stormy, not clear, just the neutral gray of a sky that had decided not to commit. The trees were bare, the kind of bare that made them look structural, like scaffolding holding up the sky. She turned where the map suggested. An unmarked intersection with a rusted green signpost, one arm of which pointed towards something called Ashworth Lane. She turned onto it. The road changed immediately. Narrower. Asphalt with gaps in it, grass growing through the cracks. Trees on both sides close enough that their branches met overhead in places. She drove slowly. The Honda's suspension registered every heave and divot in the road. She drove for 11 minutes. Then the trees opened. She stopped the car. In front of her, at the end of the lane, at the top of a gentle rise, was an estate. Not a house. An estate. The main structure was 3 stories tall, New England colonial in its bones, but with details that came from somewhere earlier, and more particular, wide front steps, a porch that wrapped around 3 sides of the building, windows that were tall and narrow with dark frames, the kind designed to manage cold rather than invite light. The walls were brick, red-brown gone rust in places, and the roof was slate, dark gray-green, a few tiles clearly newer than the rest. A chimney rose from the left side, and from the far right, a smaller chimney, older-looking. The gardens surrounding the house had gone wild. Ornamental grasses grown tall and collapsed on themselves. Boxwood hedges grown shapeless. But under the wildness there was structure, old stone edging along the paths, the ghosts of carefully planned beds, the skeleton of something once very deliberately kept. To the left of the main house, connected by a covered walkway, a stone carriage house, low-roofed, its wooden doors dark with age. To the right, set back slightly, a smaller outbuilding, with a newer roof, the contrast obvious even from a distance. And at the top of the front steps, standing absolutely still, holding a black umbrella he had apparently brought on principle rather than necessity, because it was not raining, was Raymond Whitlock. He was watching her. He had been waiting for her. Olivia sat in the idling car for a moment, and looked at the building on the hill, and felt something strange happen in her chest. Not excitement. Something quieter. The particular sensation of recognizing a place you have never been, not because you've dreamed it, not because you've seen a photo, but because something in the scale of it matches something inside you that you've never had a word for. She turned off the engine. Got out of the car. The cold hit her immediately. The wind off the lake. She could see the lake now, through the trees to the right of the estate, a gray-silver expanse of still water barely visible through the bare branches. This can't be right, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she meant it to. Whitlock came down the steps. Unhurried. He moved the way people moved, when they had nothing left to prove about their pace. He stopped 3 feet from her and looked at her with those green hazel eyes and said, "Welcome to Ashworth House, Miss Mercer. This is your inheritance." She stared at him. "You gave me $1. "I did. In front of those people." "Yes. And you're telling me." She gestured toward the building behind him. The 3-story building, with the slate roof, and the old brick, and the overgrown formal gardens, and the carriage house, and the secondary structure, and the lake visible through the November trees. "I'm telling you that Dorothy Ashworth was very specific about the order in which you received information," Whitlock said. "And her reasons for that specificity were not arbitrary." She kept looking at the building. She could not seem to stop looking at it. "What are her reasons? Would you come inside?" She didn't move. "Tell me one of them first." He looked at her. Then he said, "Donna Hargrove was in that room yesterday. If I had read the full terms of this bequest, with Donna Hargrove and her son in attendance, they would have been at the courthouse before you reached the highway." Olivia turned to look at him. The Hargrove family retains 3 attorneys. They have used those attorneys to diminish, delay, and defeat people who had legitimate claims on things that belonged to them. Dorothy knew this because it happened to her. In 1991, after Dorothy's husband died, Donna Hargrove filed a claim against his estate asserting that he had verbally promised her a portion of his business assets. He had made no such promise. Dorothy spent 19 months and $280,000 in legal fees establishing that fact. He paused. Dorothy wanted them to leave that conference room yesterday feeling like they had already won. People who believe they have already won do not immediately call their attorneys. Olivia was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the bare trees, and the sound was like water, or like something trying to be water. She planned this. She planned it carefully and at length. She began planning it 3 years ago. He held the front door open. It was a heavy door, old wood, iron hinges. Come inside. I have a great deal to show you. The foyer was enormous. That was the first thing. Not elegant. Not right now. Not in its current state, with the dust and the covered furniture and the cobwebs hanging from the chandelier like something left over from a different era, but enormous in its proportions, in the height of its ceiling, in the sweep of the staircase that rose from the center of it and curved toward the second floor. The staircase was oak, very dark, very old, the kind of wood that had been polished so many times it had developed its own depth. The chandelier overhead was not crystal. It was glass, blown glass, heavy pieces of it, pale amber and clear, some of them the size of her fist. A piece like that would cost something now. In the 1940s, when this house had presumably been furnished, it might have been slightly less remarkable. It was still covered in cobwebs. The cobwebs were, in a strange way, evidence of how long the glass had been undisturbed. To the left, the sitting room. Furniture shrouded in white linen. The shapes beneath suggesting couches and armchairs and one very large piece that was probably a secretary desk or a sideboard or something else that no one had needed to access in years. To the right, a library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls, still full. Books upright, books lying flat, books stacked in front of other books. Not organized by any system Olivia could immediately identify, but dense, full of things someone had actually read and kept. Dorothy lived here alone for 32 years, Whitlock said behind her. After her husband passed in 1991, she chose not to sell or relocate. She said the house was where she had worked out who she was, and she didn't intend to leave until she was done. Electricity, because she was a nurse, and she thought in practical categories, and the practical category was, this house has been closed for a long time. Power was cut approximately 3 years ago, when the utility company required significant upgrades to the service line. Dorothy declined to pay for the upgrade at the time, and arranged an alternative for the one system in the house she considered non-negotiable. He was already moving toward the back of the house. Water service was suspended 2 years ago. The septic system requires full replacement. It's been assessed, and the estimate is between $22,000 and $28,000. The roof has 2 areas of active water damage. Repair estimate $30,000 to $35,000. Property taxes are in arrears, $16,000, due within 90 days. She followed him through the sitting room, past the library, through a butler's pantry that still had its original glass-fronted cabinets, and into the kitchen. A large kitchen, old appliances, a fireplace built into the far wall for the era before central heating, when the kitchen was also the warmest room in the house. Everything covered in a fine layer of dust that suggested not neglect so much as the specific stillness of a place that had been locked and left. So, Olivia said. She was still following him through the kitchen toward a door at the back that she had assumed led to a pantry or a utility room, or possibly outside. She's left me a house I can't afford to keep. She's left you more than the house. He opened the back door. Stone steps going down. The smell that came up was cool and dry, not damp, not the smell of neglect, but something deliberately maintained. He reached past her and found a switch. A string of incandescent bulbs came on at intervals down the stairs, not bright, but enough. He went first. She followed. At the bottom, a door. Heavy, steel-framed, with a lock that looked industrial. He took a second key from his coat pocket. He had been carrying at least 2 keys this whole time, she realized, and unlocked it. The door swung inward. She walked through it. What was on the other side of that door was not a wine cellar. It was not a root cellar. It was not a storage room for the overflow furniture of a house that had been collecting things for a century. It was a climate-controlled art storage facility, built inside the original stone foundation of the house, retrofitted with insulation and humidity control and temperature management systems that were running right now, powered by a separate generator she could hear running quietly in a ventilated alcove to the left of the entrance. That was why the power to the house was cut, but this room was still running. Dorothy had not been paying for the whole house. She had been paying for this. The walls were lined with racks. Each rack held paintings, wrapped in protective cloth, separated by padding. In the center of the room, 3 rows of wooden crates, each labeled in black marker, not with names, just with years. 1969, 1974, 1981, 1988, 1995, 2001, all the way to 2003, when apparently the collecting had stopped, or slowed, or concluded. Whitlock walked to the nearest rack and carefully, deliberately, drew back the cloth from the painting closest to the entrance. It was a landscape. New England. She knew what New England looked like, had grown up in it, and this painting had that quality, but made strange by color. The colors were too saturated, too intentional, not photographic, something that had looked at the landscape and made a decision about it. The brushwork was loose in places and very precise in others, and even Olivia, who had not spent her life in galleries, could tell that it required skill to look that uncontrolled. She looked at the lower right corner. James Rourke. She had seen that name. She had seen it on a small placard at a fundraising auction 2 winters ago, at the hospital's annual gala, that she had attended, because nurses received discounted tickets, and she had wanted to feel, for one evening, like she still belonged to that world. A painting by James Rourke had sold for $95,000. She had stood in front of it for a long time. She had thought about what $95,000 would do for her family's debt load. She had thought, there are people who look at a painting and see beauty, and people who look at a painting and see what it could pay for, and she had been disturbed to discover which kind of person she had become. Dorothy purchased this painting in 1974, Whitlock said. James Rourke was teaching high school art classes in Derry at the time. He had exhibited twice, locally, with minimal sales. Dorothy paid $400. Olivia couldn't make a sound. Current auction estimates for Rourke's work range from $150,000 to $220,000 per painting, depending on period and subject. This is a mid-period piece. It would be at the higher end of that range. She looked around the room. The racks. The crates. How many? She said. Her voice came out flat. Not a question exactly. 54 paintings. 6 sculptures in the crates. Dorothy commissioned a private appraisal from Christie's, New York, approximately 2 years ago. I have a copy of the appraisal in my briefcase. He looked at her steadily. The total estimated value is between $9 and $13 million. Olivia sat down on the stone floor. She didn't plan to. Her knees simply decided they were done participating in the vertical experiment, and she was on the floor before she had fully processed the decision to sit. The stone was cold through her slacks. She didn't care. $9 million. $13 million. The range between those numbers was larger than any sum she had ever considered in relation to herself. Her brain kept trying to attach the numbers to something tangible, and kept failing. The numbers were too large to be real, and too specific to be hypothetical. Why, she said. She meant, why didn't she sell it? She meant, why did she live alone in a house, without power if she had $13 million in a basement? She meant, why me? She asked the last one out loud. Why me? She didn't know me. We hadn't spoken in 20 years. She knew more about you than you might expect. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced an envelope, not the folder, from his briefcase. A separate envelope, small and cream-colored and sealed. He held it out. She wanted you to read this, before we continued. The envelope had her name on it in black ink. The handwriting was old-fashioned, not the rounded cursive they had tried to teach her in 3rd grade, but something more angular, learned from a different era of penmanship instruction, deliberate and slightly backward slanting. Olivia Mercer. Below that, in smaller letters, read when you're ready. She wasn't sure she was ready. She opened it anyway. The paper inside was heavier than the envelope. Cream-colored. The same handwriting, and it covered both sides of the page, and it began. If you are reading this, it means you drove 2 hours on a road that doesn't appear on any map, with gas money, that probably came at some cost to you, and you are sitting somewhere inside Ashworth House trying to understand what is happening. That alone tells me something. I did not know you in the way that people usually mean when they say they know someone. We did not have coffee. We did not talk on the phone. The birthday cards I sent when you were a child were not the beginning of a relationship, so much as an acknowledgement that I was aware you existed and thought that should be marked. But I have been paying attention to you for 3 years, Olivia. Not in a way that would have been visible to you, quietly and from a distance, and with the specific focus of someone who needed to be very sure before she acted. I know what happened when Nora was diagnosed. I know that you stopped working immediately, without hesitation, when you knew she needed you there. I know that you have not asked anyone for help more than once, because you were raised, as I was, to believe that asking twice was a form of weakness, which is not a belief I endorse, but one I understand. I know that you have kept every medical appointment, every blood draw, every follow-up scan, with the kind of consistency that requires something beyond discipline. It requires the decision, made every morning, to keep going. Donna Hargrove took something from me once. She tried to take more than she managed to get, but she cost me time and money and the particular peace of mind that comes from not being litigated at. Her son did something similar to you. Not the same thing, worse in some ways, because you had less to absorb it, and I am not able to undo that. What I can do is put something in your hands that they will not be able to take. There are conditions. Raymond will explain them. They are not punitive. They are protective of you and of what you are inheriting. I ask only that you stay a year in this house. Let Nora have the garden and the lake and the rooms to run through. Let yourself be somewhere that is not temporary. After a year, the art is entirely yours. Do whatever you think is right with it. I chose you not because you are owed something, though you are, but because I watched you for 3 years, and I did not see someone who was defeated. I saw someone who was exhausted and still going. There is a difference, and I needed to give this to someone who already knew the difference, because someone who had to learn it would use this money to rest. And I don't want this used to rest. Build something, Olivia, not something safe, something real. Dorothy Ashworth. She read it twice. She sat on the stone floor of a climate-controlled art vault in a house, without electricity in the hills of New Hampshire, and she read a letter from a woman she had barely known, and she did not cry. She wanted to. But something in the letter, something in the specific precision of it, the tone of someone who had organized their thoughts very carefully and committed them to paper and sealed the envelope and trusted that she would get this far, something in that made crying feel like the wrong response. Like it would be too small. She looked up at Whitlock, who had stood quietly throughout. There are conditions, she said. Yes. Tell me. He sat down in the chair near the work table at the back of the room. He opened the folder on his knee. You must reside at Ashworth House full-time for a minimum of 1 year from the date of occupancy. You cannot sell, lease, or transfer the property or any item from the collection during that period. If you vacate the property for more than 14 consecutive days or attempt to transfer ownership, the full estate reverts to the New Hampshire Land and Heritage Trust. I have a daughter in school in Concord. There is an elementary school in Greystone Falls, 7 miles from the estate. She was quiet. What else? Dorothy also set aside $50,000 in a designated repair and operating fund. This money is available to you immediately for the purpose of restoring utilities, addressing the roof and septic, and covering living expenses during the transition. It is not tied to the estate freeze. It exists in a separate account that was structured specifically to be accessible regardless of any legal challenges to the will. Olivia stared at him. She anticipated legal challenges. She anticipated Donna Hargrove. He said it without inflection. She has been anticipating Donna Hargrove for 30 years. Olivia looked down at the letter in her hands. Then she looked around the storage room, the racks, the crates, the generator humming in its alcove. $13 million in paintings wrapped in protective cloth and stored in a purpose-built vault under a house that had no running water. She had $17 and a folded map. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She answered it. Because she answered unknown numbers now, you had to, when you had a sick child, because doctors and hospitals and insurance adjusters called, from numbers she had never seen before. The voice on the other end was Donna Hargrove. Clear and cold and entirely certain of itself. I don't know where you are right now, Donna said. But I know that Raymond Whitlock filed supplemental paperwork with the probate court this morning. And I have 3 attorneys who are very good at their jobs, and are going to find out exactly what that paperwork says. A pause. I hope whatever she left you was worth the trouble you're about to have. The call ended. Olivia held the phone for a moment. The generator hummed. Whitlock watched her from the chair. They already know, she said. They suspect. They don't know what they're contesting yet. They'll find out. Yes, probably within the week. He looked at her without alarm. Dorothy knew this would happen. What did she prepare? He stood. He closed the folder. He looked at her the way he had looked at her across the conference room table, when he had handed her a card on top of a dollar bill, with the measured steadiness of a man who had been waiting for this conversation for a long time, and was relieved, finally, to be having it. Come up to the library, he said. I'll show you everything. She stood up from the stone floor. She put Dorothy's letter back in the envelope. She put the envelope in her coat pocket, next to the cream-colored card she had been carrying since yesterday, and she followed Raymond Whitlock up the stairs and through the house toward whatever came next. Because she had driven 2 hours on an unmapped road with a folded gas station map and $17. Because a woman she had barely known had watched her from a distance for 3 years and decided she was worth something. Because Nora was in Brenda's apartment across the hall in Concord right now, probably eating cereal and asking Brenda questions that Brenda was answering with admirable patience, and Nora was 7 years old and in remission and they both deserved, something more than barely. Because not going up those stairs was not an option she was willing to consider. She went. The library at Ashworth House had floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls, and every shelf was full, and not one book had been touched in 3 years, and none of that mattered right now, because Raymond Whitlock was pulling back a white linen sheet from a massive oak desk in the center of the room and unlocking its bottom drawer with a third key that Olivia had not known he was carrying. 3 keys. The man had arrived at a house reading carrying 3 separate keys. That should have told her something from the beginning. He lifted a fireproof document box onto the desk surface. Gray metal. The kind with a combination lock that people bought when they had decided something was worth protecting from both theft and disaster. He turned the combination without looking at his hands, muscle memory, repeated often enough to bypass conscious thought, and the box opened. Inside, paper. A great deal of carefully organized paper. Dorothy began assembling this in the spring of 2021, Whitlock said. He set the first folder on the desk, then the second, then a third. She called it her insurance policy. I called it the most thorough probate preparation I have seen in 31 years of estate law, and I have had clients who were considerably more litigious than Dorothy Ashworth. Olivia stood at the desk and looked at the folders without touching them. The first was labeled, in Dorothy's angular handwriting, medical evaluations. She underwent comprehensive neurological and psychiatric assessment every 6 months for the last 3 years of her life, Whitlock said. 5 evaluations total. 3 different physicians, 2 from Dartmouth-Hitchcock, 1 from Massachusetts General, who has testified as an expert witness in competency proceedings 14 times and has never been successfully impeached on the stand. He opened the folder and turned it toward Olivia. Every single report reaches the same conclusion. Full cognitive function, intact executive reasoning, clear and consistent testamentary intent. The physicians who conducted these evaluations did not know each other. Dorothy specifically requested practitioners with no existing professional relationships to eliminate any suggestion of coordination. Olivia looked at the reports without reading them yet. The letterheads were familiar, hospital logos she recognized from the world she had come from, the world of medical institutions and their particular authority. She was preparing for a challenge before she knew for certain there would be one. She knew there would be one. She had known since 1991. He set the second folder beside the first. This contains the video record. Olivia looked up. Dorothy asked me to film the signing of her will. Standard practice, not unusual. What is unusual is that she asked me to remain in the room and continue recording for 90 minutes after the signing, while she spoke directly to the camera about her reasons, her reasoning process, and her relationship, or lack thereof, with each person mentioned in the will. He paused. She also asked that I leave the room at one point, and that she continue recording alone for approximately 20 minutes. I do not know what she said during those 20 minutes. She sealed the recording and gave me a copy of the sealed file, with instructions that it was not to be opened or viewed unless the will was contested in court. Has it been opened? Not yet. He looked at her steadily. But I suspect it will need to be. The third folder was labeled Observation Record. Olivia reached for that one herself. She opened it. Handwritten pages. Dozens of them. Dorothy's handwriting, that backward slanting angular script, covering the pages and entries that were dated and brief and specific. The earliest was from March 2021. The most recent was from September 2024, 6 weeks before Dorothy died. Olivia read the first entry. March 14, 2021. Reviewed court filings from the Hargrove divorce proceedings. Public record. CM awarded minimal support despite documented medical need for child. Pattern consistent with prior Hargrove litigation strategy. Resource attrition. She turned to the middle of the record. January 2023. Confirmed Nora Mercer's remission status through indirect channels. CM continues modified work schedule. No evidence of legal action against medical providers despite debt level. Inference. Avoiding further litigation exposure, or simply cannot afford to initiate it. She turned to near the end. August 2024. Reviewed updated nursing license status. CM completed required credits in July, license renewed. Note. Completed credits while maintaining caregiving schedule. This was not easy. She did not mention it to anyone who might have helped her pay for it. Olivia set the folder down. Her hands were steady, but her chest was doing something complicated, and she needed a moment before she spoke. She tracked my nursing license renewal. She tracked most things she considered relevant data points. Whitlock was watching her with an expression that was not quite sympathy and not quite professional neutrality, something between them that she didn't have a word for. She was a very methodical woman. She ran a manufacturing business for 22 years. She had strong opinions about the value of documentation and the cost of assumptions. Olivia looked at the observation record again. Dozens of entries. 3.5 years worth. She never contacted me. No. She could have. If she wanted to help, she could have sent money. She could have called. She could have. He didn't offer an explanation. He offered, instead, the fourth folder. She left instructions for this one too. She said, if Olivia asks why I didn't contact her directly, show her this. Olivia opened it. One page. Handwritten. Dated October 2024, which was 1 week before Dorothy had died. I didn't contact you because contact creates obligation. Obligation creates performance. I didn't want you to behave a certain way because you knew I was watching. I needed to see who you actually were, not who you became when you thought someone was evaluating you. The distinction matters. I spent enough of my life being watched by people who wanted something for me to understand how a person changes when they feel observed. You deserve to be seen without that distortion. Olivia read it twice. Then she put it back in the folder and closed the folder and put her hands flat on the desk surface and took a breath. What's the timeline? She said. Her voice came out even. For the legal challenge. Donna's attorneys filed a motion to freeze the estate assets yesterday evening. The freeze motion will be heard within the week. If the judge grants it, and there is a reasonable chance she will, because freeze motions in contested estate cases are generally approved as a precautionary measure, then the $50,000 in the repair fund will be inaccessible until the full challenge is resolved. She looked at him. How long does the full challenge take? 6 to 18 months, depending on strategy, evidence, and the speed at which opposing counsel moves. She calculated without speaking. 90 days until the property tax was due. The roof was actively leaking in 2 places according to Whitlock's earlier assessment. No running water. No heat beyond whatever the fireplaces could manage. November in New Hampshire. Nora had a follow-up appointment at the hospital in 3 weeks. So I might move into a house with no utilities and immediately lose access to the money designated to restore those utilities. It's possible. And if I don't move in within, what? A reasonable period of time. The will specifies occupancy must commence within 60 days of the reading. 60 days, which gave her until mid-January, which was the deepest part of winter in the White Mountains. She thought about the apple tree in the backyard of the house in Farmington that had been in her marriage. Nora running circles around it. She thought about the pull-out sofa in the Concord apartment, where she had been sleeping for 2 years, and the way the futon bar pressed into her lower back around 4 in the morning, and how she had started thinking of that discomfort as part of her baseline. She built you a very good case, Olivia said finally. Tell me it's a very good case. It's a very good case. He said it without hesitation. Dorothy did not prepare this to be adequate. She prepared it to be overwhelming. The question is not whether we have the evidence. The question is whether opposing counsel can create enough confusion in front of the right judge to make the freeze permanent and the challenge viable long enough to exhaust you financially. He paused. Which is their strategy? It has always been their strategy. She knew that. She had watched that strategy operate on her own life for 2 years. I need to talk to Brenda, she said. She drove back to Concord that afternoon with the heat on high, and her mind doing something that was not quite thinking, more like sorting. Laying things out in order of urgency. Roof, taxes, utilities, Nora's school transfer, her own work situation, the nursing license she had just renewed, and the part-time position she had been building toward, and the life in Concord that was small and painful but known versus the life that was now technically possible and very large and almost entirely unknown. Brenda was in the hallway when Olivia got back, not obviously waiting. She was carrying a laundry basket and appeared to be doing something legitimate with it, but the speed with which she looked up when the elevator opened said she had been listening for footsteps. Well, inside, Olivia said. They sat at Brenda's kitchen table with coffee that Brenda made, without asking because she knew the answer. Nora was at school. The cat, Biscuit, examined Olivia from the refrigerator top with his single-eared skepticism and then decided she was acceptable and went to sleep. Olivia told her everything. She told it in order, which was how she told things when they mattered, beginning to end, without editorializing, the way she wrote nursing notes. Facts first, assessment after. Brenda did not interrupt. This was, for Brenda, an act of significant self-restraint, and Olivia appreciated it, without saying so. When Olivia finished, Brenda picked up her coffee mug, held it in both hands, and looked at the table surface for a moment. $9 to $13 million. In paintings in a basement. In a climate-controlled vault under the kitchen. Brenda looked up. The woman didn't have electricity, but she had a climate-controlled vault. For the paintings, the generator runs separately. That is, Brenda stopped. That is actually kind of extraordinary. In a completely unhinged way. Yes. And you have to live there for a year. And there might be no money to fix the utilities during that year if the freeze motion goes through. Brenda set the mug down. Her expression had moved from trying to process into something more focused. Brenda, when she shifted into logistics mode, became a different person, the payroll manager replacing the neighbor, the woman who managed the financial records of a 400-person company making the assessment of a problem. What's the tax bill? $16,000. Due in 90 days. And you can't access the $50,000. Not if the freeze goes through. But the paintings aren't frozen. Olivia looked at her. The freeze is on the cash account, right? Not on the physical assets. The paintings are standing property. They're yours under the will. Brenda was already thinking faster than she was talking, which was unusual for Brenda. Can you use them as collateral? Olivia had not thought about this yet, which surprised her, given that she was the one sitting on it, because she had been thinking about the problem as closed. As, money is frozen, therefore no money. And the reframe was so simple that it was almost embarrassing. The money was frozen. The assets were not. I don't know, she said. I need to ask Whitlock. Ask Whitlock. Brenda pointed at her. Tonight. Don't let that sit. Olivia called Whitlock from her apartment after Nora went to bed. He picked up on the second ring, which meant either he was still working or he had been expecting her call. His answer was measured but not dismissive. Using the collection as collateral for a bridge loan was legally possible because the freeze order, as filed, applied specifically to Dorothy's liquid estate accounts. The paintings were physical property that had been transferred to Olivia under the will, and while a broader injunction might eventually cover them, the current filing did not. He would need to consult with a banking contact in the morning. He thought it was worth pursuing. She thanked him and hung up and sat on her pull-out sofa in the dark for a while. Then she texted Brenda, "You might have just solved the first problem." Brenda texted back, 11 seconds later, "I'm putting that on my resume. Solved multi-million-dollar estate crisis while doing laundry." Olivia went to sleep. For the first time in a week, she went to sleep before midnight. She gave herself 2 weeks to organize the move. 2 weeks was not very long. It was long enough. She told Nora on a Sunday morning, at the kitchen table, over pancakes, that Nora was technically making herself under Olivia's technical supervision. Nora was 7 and had recently decided she was old enough to make her own breakfast, which was largely true, with only occasional exceptions involving the smoke alarm. "There's a place we're going to live," Olivia said. "It's called Ashworth House. It's in the mountains. It has a lake." Nora turned from the stove with the spatula. Considered. "Like a real lake?" "Like a real lake. With fish." "Probably. And the lake is ours." "The lake isn't ours. But we can see it from the windows." Nora flipped the pancake with a confidence that Olivia found simultaneously impressive and nerve-wracking. "How big is the house?" "Very big." "Bigger than here?" "Much bigger." Nora thought about this with the systematic thoroughness she applied to most decisions. "Do I have to share a room?" "No. Not with anyone. You'll have your own room." Another pause. "Is it far from the hospital?" Because of course that was the question. Not, "Will I have friends?" Not, "What about my school?" Not, "What will my room look like?" The hospital. Because Nora was 7 years old and had been going to a particular hospital for 3 years and had opinions about it and understood, at a level that most children her age didn't have cause to understand, that proximity to medical care was a variable worth tracking. "It's farther than here," Olivia said carefully. "But there's a hospital in the next town, and we can still go to Concord when you have your regular appointments." Nora nodded, looked at the pancake, looked at her mother. "Is there a yard?" "There's a garden. It's very overgrown, but it's there." "And a lake." "And a lake." "Okay." Nora turned back to the stove. "I want to see a picture." Olivia had taken pictures on her phone during the visit to Ashworth House. She pulled them up, the exterior from the driveway, the wide front steps, the wraparound porch, the lake visible through bare trees. She set the phone on the counter next to Nora. Nora studied the pictures while the pancakes cooked. She scrolled through them slowly, with the deliberate attention she gave to things she was actually evaluating rather than things she was performing interest in. "The garden is really bad," she said finally. "It is. We could fix it maybe." "We could try. I want to try." Nora slid the phone back across the counter. "Can I bring all my books?" "Yes." "And the moon lamp?" "Absolutely yes." "Okay." She plated the pancakes with the satisfaction of someone who had reached a decision. "I'm ready." Olivia looked at her daughter across the kitchen table and felt something move through her chest, something that wasn't grief and wasn't joy, and was probably both, the way a lot of things in parenthood occupied a space that required 2 contradictory words to describe. Nora was 7. She had been sick. She had lost her hair and her house and her father's daily presence in the same 18 months. She had been enrolled in 2 schools in 2 years. She slept with a moon lamp and made her own breakfast and asked whether the new place was far from the hospital. She was ready. They moved on a Thursday in early December. Timothy Clark showed up at Ashworth House an hour after Olivia arrived. She had not hired him yet. He appeared because, as he explained, he had driven past the lane and seen a Honda Accord parked at the bottom and put together what that meant. He was 49 years old, broad across the shoulders, with hair that had gone brown-gray at the temples, and hands that showed the specific topography of someone who had worked with them for 30 years. He looked at the exterior of the house with the assessing eye of a contractor who was already running numbers, and then he looked at Olivia. "You're Dorothy's person," he said. She had not thought of herself that way before. "But, yes, I figured she'd find someone eventually." He turned back to the house. "Porch railing is rotted on the north side. You've got flashing failure at the east dormer, and I want to get up on the roof before the next freeze. The generator in the basement is a 2019 Generac. It should be fine, but the propane tanks need to be refilled." She looked at him. "I haven't hired anyone yet." "I know. I'm not hired. I'm just looking." He put his hands in his pockets. "My father worked this land for 16 years. Dorothy paid his salary for a full winter when he broke his wrist and couldn't work. She never mentioned it to anyone. She just did it. He looked at the house again. I'd like to help if you'll have me. We can talk about numbers whenever you're ready. Brenda stayed for 4 days. She arrived with her car packed, with practical objects, an extra electric kettle, 2 battery-powered lanterns, a case of bottled water, a box of shelf-stable food organized by category, and Biscuit the cat in a carrier that Biscuit had very strong feelings about. The first day, Brenda discovered the kitchen's hidden cabinet, a tall pantry behind a false wall panel that swung open when you pressed the right spot, containing Dorothy's complete set of Wedgwood china. Not the set she had left to Donna Hargrove. A different set. 12 place settings, still in their original tissue paper, never used. Did she just have 2 full sets of china? Brenda opened and closed the hidden panel 3 times, apparently to confirm that it was real. She apparently had opinions about what she wanted to leave to whom. Olivia was examining the fireplace in the kitchen, which Timothy had told her was functional, which turned out to be entirely accurate. It drew well and heated the kitchen to a reasonable temperature within 45 minutes of lighting. The Wedgwood she left to Donna was the everyday set. This was the formal set. She left the everyday set to the woman, who tried to steal from her and kept the good china for herself until she died. Yes. Brenda sat down at the kitchen table. She had the expression of someone genuinely delighted. I love her. I never met her, and she's been dead for 6 weeks, and I love her. The second day, Brenda found the Robert Frost collection on the library shelves. 3 shelves of it, every major collection, multiple editions of some, the Library of America volume, and a handful of older cloth-bound editions that looked like they had been bought used somewhere. Tucked inside a 1949 edition of complete poems, pressed between pages 72 and 73, was a small brass key. Brenda carried it to the kitchen, where Olivia was on a call with Whitlock. She held it up silently. Olivia looked at it. Mouth, where did you find that? Brenda pointed in the direction of the library. Olivia said into the phone, Raymond, I'll call you back. Then she took the key from Brenda and turned it over in her hand. It was small, the kind of key that belonged to a piece of furniture or a particular door, not a master lock. Old, the kind of brass that had aged to a darker tone. They looked at it together. Hidden key in a poetry book, Brenda said. Inside a Frost collection, specifically. Is there something that might need a key in this house that you haven't found yet? Olivia thought about the tour Whitlock had given her. The library, the kitchen, the vault, the sitting room, the staircase going up. She had been in most of the second floor. She had not been to the third floor yet, because Timothy had said the attic stairs needed reinforcement before she should use them regularly, and he hadn't finished that yet. She had noticed, on the one brief look she'd taken at the third floor landing, a door at the end of the hall that had a different kind of lock than the others. A keyhole lock. Old hardware. The door itself was darker than the others, a different wood, or the same wood, with a different history of use. She had assumed it was a storage room, or a room that didn't open. She had not thought to try opening it, because she had not had a key. Until now. There's a door on the third floor, she said. Brenda looked at her. And you're just going to leave it for now, right? Because there's a reasonable amount going on already, and adding a mystery door is definitely not. I'm going to wait until Timothy reinforces the stairs. Good. Yes, that's the right call. Brenda took the key back from her and placed it on the kitchen counter, in the center, where it could not be overlooked. Tomorrow, then, after the stairs are done. Obviously, but before the stairs were done, before Olivia had a chance to think about the third floor door for longer than a passing moment, the letter from the Merrimack County Probate Court arrived. She was in the kitchen, with a cup of coffee and the folder of unpaid contractor estimates that Timothy had left her the day before. It was early morning. Nora was still asleep. The letter came in the day's mail, which the rural route carrier deposited in a box at the end of Ashworth Lane, that Olivia had to drive to collect, and she read it in the car at the bottom of the lane, because she couldn't wait. The freeze motion had been granted, not permanently, pending the full hearing, which was scheduled for 6 weeks out, but effective immediately. All liquid assets of the Dorothy Ashworth estate were frozen. The $50,000 in the repair fund, which Whitlock had been careful to structure separately, was, under the broad language of the order, arguably included. Arguably, which meant it required a legal fight to access, which meant time, which meant weeks, probably, of the house, without proper heat in December in New Hampshire. She sat in the car and read the order twice, and then looked out the windshield at the lane going up through the bare trees toward the house, and she made herself think clearly. The paintings were not in the order. She had confirmed this, with Whitlock in that late-night call. Physical property, not liquid assets. The freeze did not cover them. Brenda had been right. The bridge loan was the path. She called Whitlock from the car. He picked up before the second ring. He had already seen the filing. The bank contact, he said. I have a meeting this afternoon. Can you come to Greystone Falls? She drove to town. First Merrimack Bank occupied a red brick building on the main street of Greystone Falls that looked like it had been built sometime between 1920 and 1950 and had decided that was enough building for one institution. Howard Finch met her in the lobby, late 50s, the kind of tidy that came from long professional habit, a pocket square folded into his breast pocket with geometric precision. He shook her hand. Miss Mercer, Raymond tells me you've inherited the Ashworth property. I have. He led her to his office, and they sat, and he looked at the Christie's appraisal for a long time, without speaking, which Olivia had learned was what people did when they were processing a number they wanted to be certain of before they said it aloud. I knew Dorothy, he said finally. Not well. She didn't bank here. She used a Boston institution for most of her affairs. But she bought local bonds every year. Showed up in person to do it. Wouldn't do it by mail. He looked up from the appraisal. She did it every year for 4 decades. She said small towns needed local investment more than they needed absentee sentiment. Olivia didn't know what to say to this, so she said nothing and let it sit. The freeze order pertains to liquid estate accounts, Finch said, not to transferred physical assets. That's my understanding. Your legal claim to the collection is solid? The will is properly executed? Raymond Whitlock has been managing this estate since 2019. He is everything. Finch set the appraisal down. He looked at her with the assessing directness of a man who made decisions about risk for a living. A bridge loan against the collection, collateralized by Christie's most recent appraisal, pending a fresh valuation, which we would require within 60 days. Amount needed? The property tax arrears are $16,000. The roof repair is estimated at $30 to $35. Utilities restoration another $8 to $10. Living expenses for 2 months while we wait for the court to resolve the freeze. She had done the math 3 times on the drive into town. $65,000 would cover everything, with a margin. Interest will be prime plus 2, given the nature of the collateral. That's acceptable. He looked at the appraisal again, then at her. Dorothy bought that Rourke painting for $400 in 1974. I know, and it's now worth $200,000, approximately. He was quiet for a moment. She had excellent judgment. She seemed to. People with excellent judgment, Finch said, usually know who else has it. He stood and extended his hand. I'll need Whitlock here for the paperwork. Can you both come in tomorrow morning? She said yes, and walked out into the cold December air of Greystone Falls, and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in front of the red brick bank, and felt something uncomplicate itself in her chest. Not solved, not safe, not done, but possible, still possible, which was more than she'd had yesterday. The paperwork took 2 days, and required Whitlock in the room for most of it, and at the end of it Olivia had access to $62,000 in a separate account that she could use for the house, and not for anything the freeze touched, and Timothy Clark started on the roof the following Monday. The roof took 9 days. 8 workers at various points. Timothy managed it with a focused efficiency that reminded Olivia of good charge nurses, knowing which problem to address in what order, not wasting motion, checking and rechecking, without making it feel like doubt. Nora enrolled in Greystone Falls Elementary, 3rd grade. Her teacher was named Mrs. Aldridge, a woman in her 50s, with short gray hair, and a classroom full of drawings taped directly to the walls, which Nora had examined, with great seriousness on the first day, and declared aesthetically appropriate. She made a friend in the 2nd week. The friend's name was Tyler, and he was also 7, and had apparently bonded with Nora over a shared interest in the structural properties of snow, which was something Greystone Falls had in abundance by mid-December, and which both children treated as a research opportunity. Olivia learned the rhythms of the house, which floorboards announced themselves loudly, and which you could step on quietly, which windows sealed properly, and which let cold air in along their lower edges in a draft she managed, with rolled towels, until Timothy could address it. Where the light came in during the morning, from the east-facing windows in the library, which caught the sunrise first, and made the dust motes visible in long golden shafts, that Nora thought were beautiful, and Olivia thought were evidence of how much cleaning still needed to happen. She found a rhythm of her own. Early mornings in the library, with coffee and the paperwork that never ended, the estate documents, the contractor invoices, the correspondence from Whitlock's office. Afternoons checking in, with Timothy on whatever was being fixed that day. Evenings making dinner in the kitchen by the light of the fireplace and the lanterns, until the electrical work was finished in week 3, when the overhead lights came back on, and Nora looked up at them and said, "Oh, just oh," the way a child said it, when something had been missing long enough that its return was a small shock. The legal challenge was filed formally 3 weeks after the move. Donna Hargrove, through Preston Allen of Allen and Monroe in Boston, alleged that Dorothy Ashworth lacked testamentary capacity at the time of the will's execution. Secondary claim, undue influence. Whitlock called her the morning the filing came through. Undue influence, she repeated. The argument is that you manipulated Dorothy into leaving you the estate. Given that you have no verifiable record of contact with her in 20 years, it's a difficult argument to make successfully. But it introduces enough complexity to make the challenge viable long enough to be expensive. She was sitting in the library. Through the window, the snow-covered grounds of Ashworth House were white and very still. They're saying I manipulated a woman I hadn't spoken to in 2 decades. They're saying it's possible. In probate litigation, possibility is enough to get a hearing. This was the part that had always exhausted her. The way the system could be weaponized not to reach a true conclusion, but simply to produce enough friction that the other side gave up. She had watched it happen in her divorce. She had watched Stephen's family's attorneys make every reasonable request require unreasonable effort, until she no longer had the energy to make reasonable requests. She was not doing that again. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. "I need you to think carefully about whether there is any evidence of Dorothy's interest in your situation that you haven't yet identified. Any contact, any indication that someone else was aware of her attention to you. Anyone who might be able to speak to her character and mental state as recently as this summer." She thought. She was good at this, the methodical review of available information that nursing had trained her to do. She thought about Dorothy's observation record, the entries about hospital appointments, about the nursing license, about court filings. She tracked Nora's medical appointments, she said. How? If she wasn't contacting anyone at the hospital. I've wondered that as well, Whitlock said. I don't have a complete answer. What I know is that some of the entries in the observation record contain information that would have been difficult to obtain through public records alone. This had been sitting at the back of her mind since she first read the record. The entry about Nora's remission status, specifically, that was medical information. It was not public. Someone with access to it had shared it. And there was only one person in Greystone Falls she knew of with any long-standing connection to Dorothy. She called Timothy that evening. He answered on the second ring. She could hear the sound of something in the background, a workshop, maybe, or a garage, the sound of tools resting after use. Did Dorothy ever ask you about me? She said. A pause. Last spring. She called to ask whether I knew of a good pediatric specialist in Concord. Said she was asking for someone she was keeping an eye on. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know Concord hospitals well. She said that was all right. She'd find out another way. I didn't think about it again until, another pause, until you showed up. Olivia was quiet. She didn't ask me to do anything, Timothy said. She didn't tell me who she was asking about. But looking back, I think she wanted to know that whoever it was had good options. She thanked him and hung up. She sat in the kitchen with the fire going and thought about this woman who had watched from a distance, who had asked careful questions through indirect channels, who had organized 3 years of observations into a document and locked it in a fireproof box, and given the key to a man she trusted completely, who had, at some point, driven to Concord and looked at her. The thought arrived, without warning, and settled into her like something that had been waiting to land. Dorothy had been in Concord. She must have been. Some of the details in that observation record were not available through court filings or indirect phone calls. They were the details of someone who had been present. She looked at the kitchen counter. The brass key was sitting where Brenda had placed it, in the center of the counter, obvious and patient. The third-floor door. Timothy had finished reinforcing the attic stairs a week ago. She had not gone up yet. She had been telling herself she would get to it. There was always something else more immediately urgent, but the real reason was something less practical, something closer to the feeling she'd had as a child about the last page of a book. The way you slowed down when you knew you were close to the end, because the ending was the only thing you couldn't go back to being before. She picked up the key. The stairs to the third floor were solid under her feet. Timothy had replaced 4 treads and reinforced the stringers on both sides, and the work was clean and tight. The landing at the top was small. 3 doors on the right, all standard interior door hardware, all unlocked. The door at the end of the hall was the one she had noticed before. Darker wood, different hardware. The keyhole lock that matched the key. She turned the key. The lock released, with a sound that was less like a mechanism engaging and more like something being permitted. The door opened. The room on the other side was smaller than she had imagined. A single north-facing window, the lake visible below in the winter dark, and the snow beyond it reflecting enough ambient light to see by, without needing the overhead fixture she found and switched on. The light was warm and low. A work table, an oak chair, and on the table, a tin box painted navy blue, a photograph album with a worn brown leather cover, and an envelope sealed, with wax, Dorothy's handwriting on the front. Open when the court requires more than what Raymond has. Not if. When. Olivia sat down in the chair at the work table. She looked at the tin box. She looked at the album. She looked at the sealed envelope. She opened the album first. The first photograph was of Dorothy at roughly 35, standing in front of Ashworth House in what looked like early summer, in a linen shirt, with her sleeves rolled up and her dark hair loose, and her expression entirely unconcerned with the camera. The photograph had the quality of something taken by someone who knew her, not posed, not arranged. Just, here she is, existing. She turned the page. The second photograph stopped her breath. It was taken from across the street. Through the window of what appeared to be a coffee shop, she could see the reflection of buildings in the glass and the shape of tables inside. 2 figures at one of the tables. A woman with brown gold hair in a dark coat, leaning slightly forward. A child next to her, small and fair-haired, looking toward the window. The photograph was slightly blurry with distance, but it was unmistakably her. And Nora. At the coffee shop on South Main in Concord, that Olivia stopped at on Tuesday mornings, when Nora had an early start, the one with the good hot chocolate, that Nora had decided was non-negotiable. Dorothy had been there. Dorothy had been across the street and taken this photograph and put it in this album in a room she locked, with a key she hid inside a poetry book. She had not announced herself, had not come in, had not walked across the street and said, "I'm the woman who's been watching you. I have something for you. I am going to change your life." She had just stood across the street in the cold and looked. And then she had gone home. Olivia held the album open too, that page, and looked at the photograph of herself and her daughter in a window, seen from outside, not knowing they were being observed, and she felt something she had not expected, not gratitude, exactly. Something more complicated. The feeling of having been known, without being asked, of being seen by someone who expected nothing back. She sat in that room for a long time, long enough for the snow outside to start again. She could hear it against the window before she could see it, that soft particular percussion of dry snow on old glass. Then she opened the tin box. Inside, a USB drive, navy blue, the same color as the tin, and a handwritten note on a small card. Dorothy's handwriting. Just 3 lines. 17 videos. 2021 to 2024. I was thorough. If they want to argue I wasn't of sound mind, these will make an argument back. Olivia held the USB in her hand. The freeze. The challenge. The 6-week timeline to a hearing. Preston Allen and his Boston firm, and the 3-attorney team that was currently being paid by Donna Hargrove to create enough noise to shake Olivia loose from something that was legally, completely, unambiguously hers. She had something now that they didn't know existed. 17 videos of a woman who had been meticulous, precise, and entirely clear-minded, explaining herself to a camera in a locked room in the mountains of New Hampshire. She took out her phone and called Whitlock. He answered immediately. She could hear that he had not been asleep. She could hear a desk lamp. Somehow, the particular quality of late-night office quiet. "Third floor," she said. "There's a room. I have a USB drive with 17 videos that Dorothy recorded between 2021 and 2024. I also have a photograph album. She was in Concord, Raymond. She took photographs. She was there in person, and she documented it." Silence. The kind of silence that was not absence but absorption. Then, "How soon can you be at my office in the morning?" She looked at the USB in her hand, looked at the sealed envelope on the table that said when the court requires more than what Raymond has. 7 o'clock, she said. 7 o'clock, he agreed. She put the USB and the photograph album back in the tin box and carried the tin box and the sealed envelope downstairs and set them on the kitchen table and made herself a cup of tea from the kettle and stood at the window looking at the snow coming down over the lake. The hearing was in 5 weeks. She had a climate-controlled vault with $9 to $13 million in art. She had a photograph album with a picture of herself seen through a coffee shop window by a woman who had chosen her from a distance. She had a tin box with 17 videos that she had not yet watched and that she was going to watch tonight, starting now, because she needed to know what she had before she walked into that hearing room. And she had, in her coat pocket, an envelope sealed with wax that she was saving for the moment it needed to be opened. She sat down at the kitchen table and opened her laptop and inserted the USB drive, and the first video began. She watched all 17 videos that night. She did not plan to. She had told herself she would watch the first few, get a sense of what she had, and go to bed at a reasonable hour because the hearing was 5 weeks away and she needed to be functional. And then the first video ended, and she pressed play on the second, without pausing, and then the third, and by the time she looked up from the laptop it was past 2 in the morning, and the fire in the kitchen had burned down to orange coals, and she had not moved from the kitchen table chair in 3 hours. Dorothy Ashworth on screen was a different creature than Dorothy Ashworth in letter. The letters had the quality of something considered and distilled, the final version of a thought, after it had been examined from every angle and the excess had been trimmed. The videos were something raw, not unpolished. Dorothy was never unpolished, but present in a way that paper couldn't quite replicate, the specific quality of someone sitting in a chair and looking into a lens and speaking as though the lens were a person she had decided to trust. In the first video, dated March 2021, she wore a navy sweater with a small pull near the left shoulder that she had clearly noticed and clearly decided not to address before pressing record. Her hair was white and pinned loosely. Her hands, folded on the work table in front of her, were the hands of someone who had done physical work at some point in her life, not soft, not decorated, just present. "My name is Dorothy Eleanor Ashworth," she said to the camera, and her voice was clear, and even, no tremor in it, no reaching for words. "I am recording this on March 14th, 2021. I am 80 years old. I have been diagnosed with mitral valve regurgitation and managed hypertension, both of which are under treatment and neither of which affects my cognitive function, a fact that has been confirmed by Dr. Merrill Haynes at Dartmouth Hitchcock, and which I mention now because I expect someone to eventually suggest otherwise." And then she paused, a very deliberate pause, like someone who had decided to let the absurdity of that last sentence breathe a little. "I am recording this," she continued, "because I have made a decision about my estate that I expect will be contested, and because the most efficient counter to a false narrative is a true one, delivered clearly, in my own voice, with my own face visible, on a date that can be verified." 17 videos. Across 3 years. Each one beginning with her name and the date, each one covering a different aspect of her reasoning, her history, her observations. The early ones were formal, the language of someone addressing a record, precise and careful. The later ones, from 2023 and 2024, were more conversational, as though she had become more comfortable with the camera over time, or less concerned with how she appeared, or simply more certain that she would not be around to be embarrassed by any of it. Video 11 was the one about Karen Whitmore. And this was the thing Olivia had not seen coming when she pressed play, even though she should have, because Dorothy had been 3 steps ahead of everything else, so there was no logical reason to think she had not been 3 steps ahead of this too. A woman named Karen Whitmore left Raymond Whitlock's office in February of 2021 after a dispute over her year-end bonus, Dorothy said, looking directly into the camera with the calm of someone reading a weather report. I know this because Raymond told me, in passing, when I came in for my first meeting with him about the estate planning, which was in March of the same year. He mentioned her in the context of explaining why the office had recently hired a new assistant. I did not know Karen Whitmore. I have never met her. I am noting this because if my will is contested, her name may come up. People who leave jobs under poor circumstances occasionally find that their bitterness acquires the specific flavor of usefulness when someone with money needs a witness. I want the record to reflect, precisely, that Karen Whitmore was not employed at Whitlock's office during any of my meetings there, and therefore cannot have witnessed anything she might later claim to have witnessed. Olivia had to watch that section twice, not because she didn't understand it, because the comprehensiveness of it was almost vertiginous. Dorothy had recorded a preemptive rebuttal to a witness who didn't exist yet in 2021, 3 years before the witness became relevant. This was not prudence. This was architecture. The woman had built a legal structure the way she apparently ran a textile business, with the understanding that the weakest points were the ones people didn't see coming, and therefore didn't reinforce. Video 17 was the last one, recorded in June 2024. For months before she died, Dorothy was thinner. The navy sweater from the first video was back, same pull near the shoulder, which she had also not addressed in 3 years, which Olivia found oddly moving, but it fit differently now. Her face had the pared-down look of someone who had been ill for a while, the way illness eventually took the spare from a person and left only the essential. But her eyes were exactly the same. I am recording this last entry because I want to be clear about something that the other videos document, but don't state plainly, she said. I am of sound mind. I know what I own. I know who I'm leaving it to. I know why, and I know that the why matters more than the what. The what is paintings and property. The why is this. I watched a woman hold her family together during the kind of loss that unmoors people, and she did not become unmoored. She bent. She did not break. And what I have spent 40 years collecting was always going to belong to someone eventually. I chose for it to belong to someone who already understood what it meant to build something from nothing, because people who already understand that use the materials better. She looked at the camera for a moment without speaking. I would have liked to know her, she said then, and it was the only moment in 17 videos where her voice changed, just slightly, just for a sentence, the word like landing, with the specific weight of something she had genuinely wished were different. But that would have changed what I saw, and I needed to see clearly. Olivia closed the laptop. The kitchen was very quiet. The coals in the fireplace were almost dark. Through the window the snow was still coming down, slower now, the kind of late-night snowfall that was more suggestion than event. She thought about being watched without knowing it. She thought about what it changed and what it didn't, because Dorothy was right, that being observed changed behavior, changed the performance of a self, and she was also right, that Olivia hadn't known. Every morning she had gotten up and driven Nora to school or to the hospital and come home and worked on the nursing credits or picked up an extra shift at the diner, and she had done all of it without an audience, and that was the point. She had not been trying to be seen. She had just been trying. She picked up the tin box and carried it upstairs and set it on the table beside her bed, the bed in the room that had been Dorothy's, which she had moved into because it was the warmest room and had the best cross-ventilation in summer, and because it seemed wrong to leave it empty. She slept. Whitlock's office at 7 in the morning had the particular energy of a man who had been awake for a while. He had made coffee, better coffee than she expected, from a small-town law office, and he had a legal pad, with notes already written on it, that she couldn't read upside down across the desk. She put the tin box on his desk. She told him what was in it. He watched the videos in order, which took 2.5 hours, during which she drank most of the coffee, and looked out his office window at Greystone Falls Main Street waking up. The florist opening her door. The diner on the corner turning its sign to open. Timothy Clark's truck going past, probably headed to a job somewhere in the hills. When the last video ended, Whitlock sat back in his chair. He was quiet for a long moment. Not processing. He had been processing while he watched. This was something else. The quiet of a man who had been hoping for a certain outcome and was now in the position of having gotten considerably more than he hoped for. She mentioned Karen Whitmore by name, he said. Video 11. 3 years before Karen Whitmore became relevant to this case. Yes. He looked at the laptop screen, now dark again. This is not a case anymore. He said it thoughtfully, not with triumph. More like a structural assessment. This is a demonstration. The hearing was set for a Friday morning in January. Merrimack County Probate Court, a courthouse that had been built in 1887 and renovated in 1974, and had the resulting aesthetic of a building that couldn't decide what era it belonged to, original crown molding overhead, industrial carpeting underfoot, fluorescent lighting that flattened every face in the room into something slightly clinical. Olivia wore the dark suit she had borrowed from Brenda for the will reading and never returned. It fit better now than it had in November. She had lost some weight in the move, the particular weight of sustained stress that went when the immediate crisis passed, or maybe she just stood differently. Preston Allen was already at the opposing table when she and Whitlock arrived. Allen was the kind of man who was always already at the table, who arrived early to hearings the way certain chess players made the first move quickly to establish that the pace was theirs to set. Charcoal suit today. No pocket square. His hair was combed back, with the precision of someone who had given it thought in the car mirror. Donna Hargrove sat beside him. Chanel again. Not the same suit as the reading. This one was charcoal, a concession to the setting. She did not look at Olivia when Olivia took her seat, which told Olivia something. Donna Hargrove had never in her life been in a room with Olivia without looking at her. The deliberate not looking was new. Judge Sandra Moore entered at 9 exactly. 62 years old. Hair that had gone salt and pepper and stayed there without apology. Reading glasses pushed up on her forehead until they weren't. She moved with the economy of motion of someone who had been doing this for a long time and had shed everything non-essential. She sat. She opened the file. She looked at both tables. We're here on the motion to contest the will of Dorothy Eleanor Ashworth, deceased. Her voice was flat and clear. Mr. Allen, you're the petitioner. Go ahead. Allen stood. He buttoned his jacket. He had a presentation style that was controlled and unhurried, the kind of measured delivery that communicated, I have been doing this for 20 years, and I am not going to rush anything. Dorothy Ashworth, he argued, had been 83 years old at her death, living alone in an isolated property, diminishing physical health in her final years, and had made his word was unusual, which he deployed, with careful neutrality, unusual decision to leave an estate valued at over $12 million to a woman she had not had verifiable contact with in more than 2 decades. This was not, Allen said, the behavior of a woman in full possession of her faculties. This was the behavior of a woman who had, perhaps unknowingly, formed a fixation, who had perhaps been vulnerable to. Here he paused. Let the pause do work, influence. He called Dr. Lawrence Scott. Scott was 70, gray-haired, with the slightly rumpled quality of a man who had been a good doctor for 40 years and was not entirely comfortable with the position he was currently in. He sat in the witness stand, with his hands folded, and answered Allen's questions carefully, acknowledging that Dorothy had mentioned Olivia Mercer in their appointments, acknowledging that the frequency of these mentions had struck him as atypical, and acknowledging, very carefully, that in his clinical opinion, the degree of focus Dorothy exhibited toward someone with whom she had no established relationship was outside the normal range of behavior. Allen said, "No further questions," and sat down, with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had just done what he came here to do. Whitlock stood. He buttoned nothing. He was already standing the right way. "Dr. Scott," he said, and his voice in the courtroom was different from his voice in his office, not louder, just more present, the way certain objects were more solid in direct light. "How long were you Dorothy Ashworth's physician?" 5 years. In 5 years, did she ever miss an appointment? Scott shifted slightly. No. Did she ever fail to disclose a medication change? No. Did she ever present with confusion about her own medical history? Repeated questions? Evidence of memory impairment? No. He said it quietly. In fact, your own clinical notes describe her as. Whitlock glanced at the folder, not because he needed to, but because precision mattered. A quote, "highly engaged and cognitively intact patient who demonstrates excellent understanding of her condition and treatment protocol." Would that be accurate? Yes, that's accurate. You testified that her attention to Olivia Mercer seemed atypical. In your clinical experience, Dr. Scott, is extended charitable interest in the well-being of a person outside one's immediate social circle a recognized symptom of cognitive decline? A pause. Not in itself. Could extended charitable interest be better explained by, for example, a consistent pattern of charitable engagement that predated the interest in Miss Mercer by several decades? Another pause. Longer. Possibly. If that context. "I'd like to submit Exhibit 7, Whitlock said to Judge Moore. He handed the clerk a binder. Records of anonymous financial contributions made by Dorothy Ashworth to 12 separate local families and organizations in Greystone Falls and surrounding areas over a period of 40 years. All documented through bank records and, in 3 cases, subsequent acknowledgement by the recipients. Dorothy Ashworth's interest in other people's circumstances was not a symptom of anything. It was her character." Alan interjected. "This is." Moore looked at him. "It's responsive to your witness's testimony, counselor. Continue, Mr. Whitlock." Whitlock nodded to the clerk. The screen at the front of the courtroom lit up, and Dorothy Ashworth appeared. Not a still photograph. Not a document. Her face. Her navy sweater. Her hands folded on the work table. The window with the lake visible behind her. March 14th, 2021. "My name is Dorothy Eleanor Ashworth," she said, and in the flat fluorescent light of the courtroom her voice carried the same quality it had carried at 2 in the morning in Olivia's kitchen, clear, unequivocal, present. "I am 80 years old." She watched Alan while the first video played. He kept his face neutral, but his hands, folded on the table, tightened slightly. When Dorothy finished explaining her cognitive status, her medical history, and her explicit anticipation of a challenge to her will, Whitlock paused the playback. "I'd like to skip to video 11, he said, "for the purposes of today's hearing." He let it play from the beginning of that segment. Dorothy's face on the screen. Dorothy's voice in the room. Naming Karen Whitmore. Explaining the timeline of Karen Whitmore's departure from the law office. Explaining exactly why Karen Whitmore could not have witnessed what she had offered to testify that she witnessed. All of it recorded in March 2021. All of it time-stamped and metadata verified and witnessed at signing by a notary who was, as Whitlock noted for the record, prepared to appear in person if required. Karen Whitmore was sitting in the gallery. Olivia did not look directly at her. She didn't need to. She could feel the quality of the room change, the particular shift that happened when something being asserted encountered its own disproof. Judge Moore watched the screen without expression for the duration. When the video ended, she looked at Alan. "Counselor," she said, "your second witness has been directly contradicted by a time-stamped video recorded 3 years before she offered her testimony. Do you want to proceed with her?" Alan opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Donna, without looking like he was looking at Donna, which was its own kind of answer. "We'll withdraw the second witness," he said. Noted. Moore made a mark. "Continue, Mr. Whitlock." Whitlock submitted the photograph album. He submitted the observation record, with its 40-plus months of dated entries. He submitted all 5 medical evaluations. He submitted, last, the sealed letter that Dorothy had labeled open, when the court requires more than what Raymond has, which Olivia had opened the previous evening for the first time, alone at the kitchen table, and which had turned out to be a single handwritten page listing, in Dorothy's precise angular script, the names of 11 other people she had considered for the inheritance before choosing Olivia, with a brief notation of her reasoning for each exclusion. Not because they were bad people, because they were the wrong fit for what she was trying to do. Whitlock did not editorialize. He submitted it and let it speak. Then he said, "Your Honor, I'd like to address the undue influence claim directly." He turned slightly, not to the gallery, not to Donna, just to the open space of the courtroom. The allegation is that Olivia Mercer manipulated Dorothy Ashworth into leaving her this estate. The timeline of the evidence before you makes this allegation not merely unproven, but logically impossible. Dorothy began her estate planning and her documentation process in March of 2021. She had not had verifiable contact with Olivia Mercer since Olivia was a child. She was not in contact with her during the planning period. She observed her from a distance, methodically, the way she did everything, and she made her decision based on what she saw when she believed no one was watching. He paused. You can't exert undue influence over someone who is watching you when you don't know you're being watched. The courtroom was quiet. Alan stood. He tried. To his credit, he was professional, and he tried. He raised the question of whether the observation record could be independently verified, whether the videos could be authenticated beyond the metadata, whether the sheer volume of Dorothy's preparation suggested something compulsive rather than lucid. These were not unreasonable questions. They were the best questions available to him, with the evidence in front of him. Judge Moore heard them all. She looked at the two tables. At Alan, precise and pressed in his charcoal suit. At Whitlock, settled and still. At Donna Hargrove, who was looking at the table's surface with an expression that Olivia could not read from across the room, but that looked, from this angle, like the expression of someone doing the arithmetic and not liking the sum. At Olivia. Moore looked at Olivia for a moment, not with sympathy and not with judgment, with the clean assessing attention of someone who had heard a great deal of testimony in this room and had developed, over decades, a reliable sense of what she was looking at. Then she looked at the screen, which was still showing Dorothy's paused image. Frozen mid-sentence, looking at the camera with those steady gray eyes. I've reviewed the medical evaluations, Moore said. I've watched the videos. I've read the observation record and the letter and the photograph documentation. I have 5 independent physicians agreeing on Dorothy Ashworth's cognitive status. I have 17 videos recorded over 3 years, beginning when the decedent was 80 years old, and in full possession of her documented mental faculties, none of which show any evidence of confusion, fixation, or impaired judgment. I have a preemptive rebuttal of your only non-expert witness, recorded 3 years before that witness became relevant. She took her glasses off, set them on the file. The motion to contest the will is denied. The will of Dorothy Eleanor Ashworth stands as executed. The estate, in its entirety, passes to Olivia Mercer as designated. The temporary freeze order is dissolved effective immediately. Costs are assessed to the petitioner. She picked up the gavel. We're adjourned. The sound of it was very clean, like a period at the end of a sentence that had been building for a long time. Olivia sat still for a moment after the gavel came down, not because she couldn't move, because she wanted to feel the exact quality of that moment before it became the next moment. The way you sometimes paused at the top of a hill before you started down, not from fear, just from wanting to register where you were. Whitlock put his hand on the table next to hers. Not on her hand, just near it. Steady. Then she heard, from behind her, the sound of Brenda Calloway exhaling. Brenda, who had driven up from Concord at 6 that morning and was sitting in the 3rd row of the gallery and had apparently been holding her breath for the last portion of the proceedings. Olivia turned around. Brenda's eyes were bright, and she was pressing her lips together in the way she did when she was not going to cry in a public venue and had made a firm decision about it. That, Brenda said, quietly, intended for Olivia only, was the most extraordinary thing I have ever watched happen in person. Donna Hargrove left without speaking. She moved through the courtroom, with the particular quality of someone maintaining their posture by force of habit, by the deep muscle memory of a woman who had spent 64 years not letting people see her knocked off balance. Her coat was buttoned before she reached the door. Her handbag was over her forearm. She looked, from behind, exactly as she always looked. She did not look at Olivia. Preston Allen, to his credit, crossed to Whitlock's table before leaving and shook hands, the professional courtesy of a man who had lost cleanly and knew it and was not going to be small about it. He did not speak to Olivia. He didn't need to. The courtroom cleared slowly, the way courtrooms did, with the shuffling institutional unhurry of a space that was accustomed to the weight of significant moments and had developed a tolerance for them. Olivia and Whitlock were the last ones at the table. The freeze dissolves effective today, Whitlock said. The repair fund is accessible. I'll file the dissolution paperwork this afternoon. And the loan from First Merrimack can be paid down as soon as the estate account is unfrozen. Howard will want to know by end of week. He closed his folder, looked at her. You should go home. She looked at him. You've been in crisis mode since November, he said. The crisis is over. Go home. Home, which was Ashworth House, which had been home for 6 weeks, which had a roof that no longer leaked and a heating system that Timothy had gotten operational in the 2nd week, and a kitchen fireplace that worked in a 3rd-floor room with a work table and a window that looked over the lake, which had Nora in it, at school right now in Greystone Falls, probably conducting some kind of structural snow experiment with Tyler at recess. She drove back to Ashworth House in the early afternoon. The January light was pale and lateral, the sun already beginning its winter lean toward the tree line even, though it was barely 2 o'clock. The Ashworth Lane turnoff was easier to find now than it had been in November. She had driven it enough times that she'd stopped needing to watch for the sign and just felt the right moment to turn. The estate looked different in winter than it had in November. The snow rounded its edges, softened the overgrown garden into something that looked less like neglect and more like intention. The way snow made everything look temporary and also permanent at once. The brick walls had snow on the window ledges. The new roof tiles were visible from the drive, a slightly different shade than the old ones, which Timothy had said would weather to match within 2 years. She sat in the car for a moment after she parked. She had been handed a dollar bill 4 months ago in a conference room that smelled like lemon furniture polish, and a woman she barely knew had been watching her from across the street in Concord for 3.5 years, and the thing that had felt like the end had been something else entirely. She got out of the car. The work that followed was not dramatic. That was the part of these stories that didn't get told often enough, the part after the hearing, after the gavel, after the moment of resolution, when what remained was not triumph, but simply the next thing. The long, ordinary work of building something from the materials you had. She paid the property taxes in February. She paid down the bridge loan in March, when the estate account was fully unfrozen and accessible. She renewed her nursing license in the spring, which she had already done, quietly, in the previous summer, fitting the continuing education credits into the margins of everything else, and began picking up shifts at the small medical clinic in Ashford that served the surrounding rural area. 3 days a week. Not because she needed the income, though it helped. Because she was a nurse. Because she knew how to do it. Because the clinic was short-staffed and the patients were largely elderly and uninsured, and the waiting room on Tuesday mornings had the specific quality of a place where people came because they had no other option, and she knew what that felt like from the inside. And it turned out that knowing it from the inside made you a different kind of caregiver than you were before. The Christie's appraisal was updated in the spring. The collection had appreciated in the months since the initial estimate. The market for mid-century American contemporary had strengthened, and 2 Rourke paintings had sold at major auction in February at prices that shifted the range upward. New total estimate, 10 to 14 million. She sold 3 paintings at auction that summer. 1 Rourke, 1 Stafford, 1 early piece by a woman named Cecilia Marsh, who had died in 1997, without significant recognition, and whose work was, according to the specialist at Christie's, about to become considerably more recognized. The combined sale, $840,000. It felt like an impossible number, and also like a number that had always been inevitable, which was its own strange kind of adjustment. She established the Ashworth Foundation in August. The stated purpose, support for pediatric oncology research and for families managing the financial impact of childhood cancer treatment. She was not subtle about the reason. She had sat in those waiting rooms. She had opened those billing statements. She had been the woman with $131,000 of debt and a daughter she was choosing over everything else, and she knew exactly what kind of money made the difference between surviving something and being destroyed by it. The Foundation's first grant cycle funded 17 families. She chose the number on purpose. The carriage house was converted over the summer and fall. Timothy's crew again, with an addition this time for a proper gallery space that could accommodate the public on weekends. Ashworth Contemporary opened in October with an inaugural show that included 4 pieces from the estate collection and 12 pieces by artists from the region, none of them famous yet, all of them working. Which was, as Olivia had come to understand, the point. Dorothy had never bought famous paintings. She had bought paintings she believed in, before anyone else believed in them. The gallery was not going to correct that instinct. It was going to continue it. The remaining 47 paintings stayed in the vault. She had no timeline on them. That was also the point, not rushing, not converting everything immediately into its most liquid form, living with things, letting them be what they were. Nora turned 8 in March, then 9. She made friends at the Greystone Falls School and kept them, which she had always done. She had always been the kind of child who made friends with the precision of someone who took the enterprise seriously and therefore didn't waste the effort. Tyler remained her closest friend, the snow experiment having evolved into a broader scientific collaboration that now apparently included soil composition and the migration patterns of certain local birds. She spent her afternoons in the room on the 3rd floor. The room that had been Dorothy's private space, the locked room, the work table, the navy blue tin box, had become, over the course of that first year, Nora's. She had asked about it in the spring, after Olivia explained what the room had been and what had been in it. She had listened to the whole explanation, with her usual serious attention, and then she had looked at the work table and the window and the view of the lake, and said, "Can I paint in here?" And Olivia had said yes, obviously, of course yes. So Timothy built a small easel from cedar and Nora began painting the lake. Not once, over and over. Every season, every light condition, every kind of weather. The lake in summer, when the water was dark green. The lake in fall, when the trees came down to the water's edge in orange and yellow and the reflection made it look like the lake was on fire. The lake in winter under ice. The lake in November, which was her favorite, the particular gray-silver quality of a lake that had decided to be serious. She was, objectively, not a skilled painter yet. She was 9. But she had the thing that couldn't be taught, which was the desire to look at the same thing repeatedly and keep finding it interesting. And that was what Dorothy had recognized in those artists she had bought for $400 before anyone knew their names. Olivia thought about that sometimes, standing in the doorway of the 3rd floor room watching Nora paint. The way certain things found each other, a woman with an eye for unrecognized worth, a child who kept looking at the same lake and finding it different every time. The way Dorothy had arranged for those two things to be in the same house, without ever being in it herself at the same time. That was either remarkable planning, or it was something else, and Olivia had stopped needing to decide which. On the first anniversary of the will reading, she did something she had been thinking about for months. She drove to Concord, not for a medical appointment, not for anything administrative. She parked on South Main and walked to the coffee shop, the one with the good hot chocolate, the one with the window that faced west toward the late afternoon light. She sat at the table by the window. She ordered 2 hot chocolates. She drank one of them. She left the other sitting across from her, getting cold, while she looked out the window at the street, where Dorothy had stood with a camera and looked in and seen 2 people who did not know they were being seen. She sat there for 40 minutes. She didn't know what she was doing exactly. Commemorating something, maybe. Acknowledging something. Sitting in the physical space of a thing that had happened without her knowledge and had changed everything. It mattered to have come back here. She couldn't have said why in a way that would satisfy someone who needed the logic made explicit. But some things didn't operate on explicit logic. Some things just required you to show up in the right place and sit still long enough to feel the weight of them. She left a good tip. She walked back to the car. She drove back to Greystone Falls on the road she knew by feel now, the highway north, the turn at Bath, the lane through the bare trees, which were in the process of budding at the very tips in the tentative way of early November, the first suggestion that the bare state was not the permanent one. The house was lit from inside when she came up the lane. Warm light in the library windows, warmer light in the kitchen. Nora home from school. Something cooking, she could smell it. From the car, which meant the kitchen window was cracked even in the cold, which meant Nora was managing heat again and had developed her own opinions about cross-ventilation. She sat in the car for a moment. The house in the early dark. The lake beyond it, invisible but present. 47 paintings in the vault below the kitchen, their value ticking upward, while they waited in the dark at 65 degrees and 45% humidity, patient in the way of things that had already waited decades and had learned not to be anxious about it. In the library, on the mantel above the fireplace, that she lit every evening now, two things. The framed $1 bill. Whitlock had suggested she keep it, and she had understood immediately why, had gone out the next day and bought a simple frame. And beside it, propped against the wall, the photograph from Dorothy's album, the one taken from across the street. Two figures at a coffee shop window. Unaware. Just present. She had printed it large and framed it herself. It hung in the kitchen now. Actually, she had moved it there because the kitchen was where she spent the most time, and she wanted it where she could see it while she made dinner. Not because she needed the reminder. Because it was true, and she wanted to live near things that were true. She thought about Dorothy, who had watched her long enough to be certain, who had built a legal fortress around a woman she had never met across a table, who had locked 17 videos in a navy tin box in a room at the top of a house that she left to the right person to unlock. She thought about what it meant to be worth something to someone you'd never met. What that required of the person watching. What it required of the person watched. And she thought about the $1 bill in the frame on the library mantel, which had made a room full of people laugh, which had been designed to make them laugh, which had been the most precise and considered cruelty, and the most precise and considered kindness in the same gesture at the same moment. Worth was the word. That was the thing. Not what you were valued at by people who didn't know the cost of things, but what you actually were, measured by someone who had been paying attention long enough to be sure. She got out of the car. She went inside.